Hi everyone, welcome to part 4, the last part of our very short class together. This lecture is actually just going to be in one part. I have you watching a lot of other videos this week, so I'm going to keep the lecture pretty short, but we're going to talk about these political foundations that helped shape California. Um, and so in California, we have this tension between liberalism and conservatism, which we obviously do in much of the country. But California is often perceived, especially by people who do not live in California, and I am not originally from California, as this super liberal place. These are election maps going back quite a way, presidential elections. We can see originally fairly democratic. Uh, that was when the Democratic Party was also quite different. But through a good portion of the 20th century and into the 21st century, right, we have some really conservative areas. And so um, we tend to elect some very conservative politicians in this state, although we are getting, generally speaking, more liberal. But we're going to talk really about liberalism in California and kind of the birth of quote unquote radical politics. Um, and so in California, we've had a lot of historical events, especially through the 60s and the 70s, with concerns to quote unquote radical politics. On the left, we can see a Native American occupation of Alcatraz. That happened where Native Americans seized that island as a way to protest, saying that they were Native American lands. Um, and then we can also see on the right a picture of the Third World Liberation Front, which we'll talk about more in this lecture, but is the student group at San Francisco State who formed strikes as a way to get a ethnic studies department at the university. And so you're reading from the textbook, you're only reading from the textbook this week, was about S.I. Hayakawa. And he was a Japanese American. He was actually born in Canada. His parents had emigrated from Japan, and then he came to the United States, first to Chicago and then to California. He began his career really as a liberal, did a lot of writings on racial equality in the United States. But he really kind of represents the splintering of the liberal movement, which we've talked about over the past couple of modules over race. And so a lot of liberals, especially white liberals, were kind of were definitely focused on racial equality, but in a different way where they didn't want to necessarily emphasize race, right? We're all kind of one American identity. And so focusing on racism as a source of as coming from ignorance, right? White people just don't know much about other races, versus this idea of racism being about economic exploitation and systematic oppression. So we've talked in past modules about how minority groups, including Asian Americans, were prevented from becoming naturalized citizens, were prevented from living in certain areas. We talked about economic exploitation, where the cheapest laborers who were least likely to unionize were the ones who were given the jobs. And so he really believed, and this is a quote from your book, that once white people were made aware of their own unexamined prejudices, they would naturally and inevitably work towards ending discrimination. And this new kind of radical politics said, actually, no, it's not about just ignorance, right? It's about ending this kind of systematic oppression. And so the Third World Liberation Front was a group of student activists comprised of several minority groups on the campus of San Francisco State, including Latinos, Asian Americans, and African Americans. And so they would hold these strikes in order to close down campus and kind of disrupt what was happening there. And basically, they wanted, excuse my typo, an ethnic studies program to help address these kind of systematic inequalities. And so this is much less about kind of us being like one America where everyone is equal, and about minority groups kind of taking ownership over these spaces and being able to kind of teach in ways that they thought would help address these systematic inequalities. Um, and, this idea of an ethnic studies department, despite the fact that now we have ethnic studies departments at hundreds of universities across the country, was a really radical idea, that you would have a department that was specifically designated to teach ethnic studies or even a specific ethnicity. So, very radical idea at the time. You're also going to read a short article about a class that was taught at San Diego State last semester, that was kind of inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement, which was called Black Minds Matter, and about this idea of teaching to kind of address these systematic inequalities. And so Hayakawa was put in charge of the university as a way to delegitimize protesters. So basically, if you have an Asian American in charge, really. And so many people in the Asian community, especially, felt betrayed by him, that he was really working for this white ideal and not properly representing Asian communities. And one member of the Asian community, Raymond Okamura, wrote to a newspaper and wrote, "Our generation has succumbed to the pressures of assimilation. The new generation want to regain a lost ethnic identity and are seriously challenging the blind acceptance of white middle class values." Um, so really, Hayakawa, thought that there might even be a place for some type of ethnic studies, but really kind of prided himself on the fact that the Asian community had overcome a lot of things by assimilating to American culture, and while many in the Asian community felt like it was time to kind of regain that Asian identity and not to ignore all the injustices that they had been subjected to before. So again, this plays back to that idea of a model minority, which I talked a little bit about in the past, of kind of using the success of a member of an ethnic group or a particular ethnic group to say that really there's not a kind of a problem with this systematic oppression, because look, if people just work hard, they can overcome this. And so the Third World Liberation Front was eventually successful in the fact that they got an ethnic studies department. They didn't get everything that they wanted. They didn't get kind of open enrollment for minorities, and they did not get kind of say over the faculty hires, nor did they get as many faculty as they were asking for. But they certainly did experience some successes. And so for the rest of this module, you're going to be focusing on kind of this idea of this quote unquote radical politics in California, and how they formed, and really, not just had an effect on California, but really kind of affected the entire country. So you're going to watch three things, you're going to watch two things and read one thing. The two things that you're going to have to watch, you're going to have to log in through the library the same way that you log into Cougar courses. So I'll provide you a link, but you are going to have to log in to access those. The first thing you're going to watch is about Cesar Chavez, which I am sure that he's a person most of you have heard of, but he organized Mexican farm workers pretty successfully. So you're going to watch a PBS special, which now is about 20 years old, but still really good, about kind of his work. You're also going to read a little introduction and a speech written by Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk was the first openly gay person to be elected to public office. He was so in San Francisco in 1977, and he was unfortunately assassinated the following year. but you are going to read a speech by him. And then last, you're going to watch a documentary that was created just a couple of years ago about the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party, which formed in Oakland, um, was and is still a highly controversial organization. They have disbanded, but people still have very controversial views about them. Many people see them as a criminal or terrorist organization, and a lot of other people see them as this group that was really working for social justice. So you're going to watch this documentary, which is about 2 hours long. So you're going to want to give yourself plenty of time to do that before the end of the module. But kind of all of the kind of opposing things that went along with this group, including violence, but also things like, working to help hungry children. So this is going to be the last time you hear my voice over this short semester. And thank you for enrolling in this very, very fast and quick class. I hope you enjoyed it. And good luck.